Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. I'm so excited. One of our favorite friend authors is here. It's Gayle Forman, and this is her first novel for adults. You might know her from her best-selling novel, If I Stay. The new one is called Leave Me. Well, Gayle, it's so great to see you.
It's great to see you.
Always good to see you.
I'm glad to be here.
And it's great to have you back here at Anderson's.
Yay, Anderson's.
Yay! But this one's a little different this time because, your first adult novel after 8 YA? Or you had a travel.
This is my eighth book, and the first one was a travel book.
Travel book.
And I like to say that it's my first book starring adults.
Starring adults.
Yes.
I like that.
Well, because as you know as a
yeah.
bookseller how many adults read YA, but also how many teenagers. Like when I was 18, my favorite author was Ann Tyler.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And that's so interesting because, this book is being compared to Ann Tyler.
I know. I don't know if I've read that one, so I was really pleased.
No,
when
I
saw
did see that, and I think that's a wonderful compliment.
I'll take it.
Yeah. So it's been out in the world just a little over a week.
Yeah.
So how does it feel to have your first novel starring adults out in the world?
It feels amazing. It's been like a lot of traveling, so it kind of came out and there was a little quiet, but ever since then I think I've been on the road now for 2 weeks, and so it's nice to be able to talk about Maribeth, to talk about motherhood. It's provided some nice openings to have these conversations about how we all feel like we're screwing up all the time, and these impossible standards that we hold ourselves to, and how difficult it is to ask for help and why that is. So I really enjoyed that part of it because Maribeth is the most like me in terms of her life situation being similar to mine.
Yeah. So, I got an indie next pick for September, which is always, woohoo, go indie bookstores, right? But also a booklist starred review, other starred, wonderful reviews out there. So that's got to make you feel really great. Yeah.
It's, you're always happy when a book goes out there into the world and people receive it the way you want to receive it.
Yeah. So many of your readers, of your YA, are crossover readers. They were adults when they read If You Stay or some of the other books, and now they've read this. So have you heard from some of them directly about how they feel about Leave Me?
I've heard from a lot of, so even those YA readers, what I've mostly heard from is younger, 20-something women for whom, who are big YA fans and who've been fans of the YA books all along, and who maybe came into this not knowing if it was for them because it's about a 44-year-old mother of 2, and saying, I loved it. It was all the feels. It felt like a Gayle Forman book. And I have to laugh at that because there was some point during the revision process where I was reading it and even the horrible characters have their redemptive moments, and I thought, oh look, it's a Gayle Forman book again. I don't really do villains, do I?
There are a lot of other warm things, wonderful things that remind you of a Gayle Forman book. So, and we'll talk about that too. So, this is one of those books that I think most of us who are moms and working moms, and we have lived vicariously through Maribeth. That we have always had that moment oh, I'm just going to take off. I can't take this anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've heard a lot about that, but this main character, and you say a lot of it's you. And,
she's the most like
me,
yes.
but not. She is totally fiction, but she is the most like you. But it's so true about the pressures and the guilt and the not asking for help and feeling like that I can do this, this sort of thing. But so where did the seeds for this novel start to grow for you? And knowing, putting your own experience or some of what you've experienced.
Sure. And interestingly, it was not the sort of urge to run away that were the seeds of it. Although I, of course, want to, and I was, in my family, we call it running away book tour. But the seeds of it were really, it started out as a revenge fantasy. About 5 years ago, we were on a family vacation. My husband, 2 kids who were very young at that point, they're 2 good friends and their 2 kids. And it was this gorgeous, their parents' beach house, and we were at the beach all day, and this big grass where the kids were out with sparklers, and we were cooking these big communal meals and sitting around the table. And then I would excuse myself and go upstairs where there was the Best Cell connection, and I would Google heart attack symptoms and, how to know if your chest pains are going to kill you, because I'd been having chest pains all week. And my mother had bypass surgery for the first time at 48, and it was a big shock to all of us when we found out she had to have it, because she had no risk factors aside from some terrible genetic luck. So I was thinking, is this me? Yeah. And when I finally did what I should have done right away, which is get to a doctor and was sent for a stress test, I started contemplating, as we writers will, the worst case scenario, which is what if I had to have the surgery, and who's going to take care of the kids? I worked from home. I was the default mom. I kind of did everything. And then who was going to take care of me? And so while thinking about that, I started to get kind of scared, and I started to get angry, and almost as a therapeutic response, I just started imagining the story of this woman who has a heart attack and bypass surgery and comes home and is still the default everything, and in exasperation leaves. Took the stress test, it wasn't my heart, all that kind of righteous fury sort of cooled down, and the book went into the drawer. But it came out a couple years later, and it had that same premise, not, some of that cathartic rage, but then the whole other story took over.
Right. Because I think for women, most of us, we ignore those things because I don't have time for this. I can't. Yeah. And also symptoms when women do have heart attacks are not the same as men.
They're not the same. Because they study heart attacks. Yeah. They've always studied men, and they have larger hearts, larger right ventricles. So that sort of clutching pain that you see in the movies is more typical of a man. Right. And then when a woman goes into an emergency room, anyhow with those pains, or to a doctor, half the time they're told, oh no, it's nothing.
That's right.
It's just stress, honey.
And also too, when you do feel things, oh, I don't have time for this. I'm going to ignore this because I have too much to do. I have too much to do.
You rationalize it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So Maribeth Klein, she's 44 years old. And her husband, Jason, and she's a journalist. And I love the magazine, Frap.
I love the name. Originally that was just a stand-in name until I figured something out, but all my friends loved it, so I'm like, okay.
Oh, it's fantastic. Yeah. And her husband Jason, startup, he's in the music business and that sort of thing. So is he based on anybody? Because I know you've based some of your other male characters on
my husband.
Yeah. Right.
So Nick likes to point out, I like to point out that Jason is a music archivist.
Right.
Nick is a news research librarian. Those are very different things. No, so he was very, very, a little bit nervous that people were going to equate him with Jason. And of course, a lot of the frustrations that I think every mother I know has with her marriage about, like, I have to do everything, I have to think of, and every default parent has. Right. That made it in there. But the funny thing about it is the book that started out as a revenge fantasy wound up being a love story. So I tell Nick that if I Stay, which originally when I wrote If I Stay, the Adam character was named Nick, and it was really writing about us being sort of young and punk rock and falling in love. If I Stay is like our origin love story, this is our middle-aged version.
Yeah. So why do you think working mothers like us and we ignore our health, and that sort of thing, and why do we put ourselves last?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of reasons, but I think that the culture dictates that mothers sacrifice themselves for everybody in the family, and it's such an exalted place to be, and of course you do everything for your children. And we get these messages all over the place, and we impose them on ourselves as well, that, oh God, I mean, I can't think of the number of times, like, occasionally I'll run out on a weekend and I'll get like a manicure, and I'll be like watching the clock if it's taking too long. Yeah. They're not even waiting for me. They're all at home doing their stuff, but I'm just like, I gotta get back. It's our Sunday together, and I'm getting a manicure. Yeah. It's crazy that we do that.
I don't know. False assumptions that we're making about
it. Is like, that's on me.
Right.
So,
but is it history, or is it just roles that we assume that's what people are thinking, or we assume that no one's going to be sympathetic to what's happening in my life?
I think it's both. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that women did not work. And they were in charge of the home, and it was the children were their sole responsibility. But now we're at a place where I think in another 2 years, women will outnumber men in the workforce, and increasingly women are the primary breadwinners. So I don't know that we've caught up with ourselves kind of culturally, or the messaging around parenthood, because that sort of idea that mothers have to be so perfect, it just continues. It just has like, it just wears different clothes through the years.
Right.
I don't know. I have kind of faith in the next generation, the millennials, because they just seem, maybe because they grew up, so many of them, with working mothers, they just seem to be like, you know, no way. Like, why should the fact that I'm a woman mean that I'm the one that does the laundry or does the grocery shopping or makes the pediatrician appointments? Like, this should be shared.
Right. And I think my two daughters, I say, Mom, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
You know, so. And they're grown now, but it's like, why are you doing that?
I know.
Yeah,
I think they're going to come at it differently.
Yeah. So Maribeth's, departure, and you can feel what she's feeling. It's so palatable, and I love the scene when she goes to Penn Station and she's going to take this train. She doesn't even know where she's going.
She doesn't know where she's going.
She knows where she's taken $25,000 out of the bank in cash. And
which, by the way, is like this big. I thought it was like going to be so huge, and I looked it up, and it's tiny.
You're thinking drug money in big bags or something, right? Yeah, that sort of thing. So, but you can feel what she's feeling, and I love the way she sits on the train, and all of a sudden, she feels like she can sleep, but without having the weight of everything on her, which is so interesting.
Do you ever have that sort of sensation where, like, it's a really, really busy time and you're about to go somewhere and you're just so stressed and then you kind of get on a plane, at least for me, and then I fall asleep because there's nothing I can do now. Like, it's out of my control.
That's right.
She has left, like, all of those things that we now have that tether us to one another permanently. Mm-hmm. She's left her computer, she's left her cell phone, all of that is at home. So it really kind of allows her to just not worry about it for a bit.
And I love the way you always, in all of your books, you put some humorous situations, and I love the way she goes and she buys a burner phone because she would watch The Wire. So she knows
what to call it.
Only
one season of The Wire because Maribeth is too busy to have caught all 5 seasons.
Of course. Like, I've hardly seen any episodes myself. So, but the thing is too is that her feelings of feeling unworthy, and all that. But some of it, and we don't want to give too much away and spoilers about what happens in the book, but her background and not knowing who her biological mother is, and some feeling of that she's not worthy of certain things. It's so interesting.
I think that we all have, it's interesting. I think that there's sort of this universal fight that I call the laundry fight, that couples who co-parent have about who does more and who's responsible for the domestic and who's more stressed and all of this. We all have that. And then, at least in my own marriage, underpinning that fight are sort of much more specific, personal, tender spots. And when those flare up, suddenly that laundry fight, which really shouldn't be a fight, it can really be solved with like a chart of who does what. You can approach it really pragmatically. But when you have all that baggage, it's hard to do that. So with Maribeth, there is all that stuff that is justified about her feeling frustrated about the fact that when she needs to lean on her family, they are so trained to lean on her, nobody knows how to let that happen. Right. But underpinning that is a much more specific personal fight, which she can't even really begin to look at or unpack until she leaves.
Right. So a visiting nurse,
Nurse Luca,
gives her some great advice. So tell us a little bit about that. And I know she kind of reflects on just some words she told her that kind of is a little bit of that impetus for her just to take off.
Well, first Luca tells her that one of the most common fantasies among women is a hospital stay, which I was tickled in the movie Bad Moms because there's that long scene where she describes wanting to get into a car accident and just, not too bad, but bad enough that she gets to eat Jell-O in the hospital. And then, Maribeth really feels that she is deteriorating backwards or healing backwards. She's deteriorating. She's feeling sicker and sicker, and she's worried about what's going to happen. She's scared that she might get so sick that she winds up dying, and then what's going to happen to her kids, which is the fear of every mother, right? You worry about what's going to happen to you. They'll be too young.
They'll be too young.
Yep.
Exactly.
And then Luca tells her, she takes her vitals and she says, you're fine, but she's like, doctors have done their part. If you really want to get better, you're going to have to do that yourself.
Yeah. But she gives her sort of those words that, that I need to do this for me.
Right.
Yeah, right. So, the warm characters you put in this book, and there's some really great characters, including Nurse Luca, and thinking about the doctor that later appears in the book, and some of her neighbors that she
Todd
meets.
and Sunita, my YA,
my gosh,
my little YA cameos. I was always so happy to see them.
Yeah. But okay, for the thing is, why Pittsburgh for you as an author? Why do you choose Pittsburgh for her? This is the city that she ends up in.
So I went to Pittsburgh for the first time about 5 years ago, and I had heard people saying, "Oh, it's really awesome," and I was like, "Yeah, sure it is, right? I live in New York, and it has the word pits in it. Obviously, it's going to be terrible." And then I got there, and I was kind of thought it was amazing. And so when I decided to she was going to run away, I just kind of knew she was running to Pittsburgh. And then I just started researching it. And there's a YA author, Siobhan Vivian, who really helped me out. And it's very livable, and it's really inexpensive, relatively speaking, to where she'd been living. And then I went and traveled to Pittsburgh to do research, and kind of wanted to move there. I was like texting my pictures of my husband, texting pictures to my husband of like real estate or swimming pools that were completely open, as opposed to our crazy city pools in the city that are always overrun. I'm like, let's move here. I still fantasize about Pittsburgh.
So, and that always reminds me of Michael Chabon. His first book was The
Right.
Mysteries of Pittsburgh,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So, but I love your characters. They're warm, they're real, but also too, you put those warm moments between people and the relationships and those moments, but also, you treat the tearful moments so well.
Thank you.
And I don't know, how do you balance that without becoming too maudlin or adding too much humor? So is it something you have to craft, or is it something you've worked out with all of these novels you've written?
You just kind of develop instinct for yourself. Like, I know when I'm reading something and I think I feel manipulated, I'm annoyed, I'm irked. If something does not feel earned with me, then I don't like that, both as a reader and as a writer. So I think sometimes the pacing of relationships is very tricky. And for example, in this book, when I was so enamored with Dr. Grant, the cardiologist that she sees, that I wanted him to kind of just be like heroic and warm, and for him and Maribeth to kind of have their connection straight away. But it wasn't right. It was just me sort of impatient to have that happen. So that required some like sort of going back and how modulating that relationship through, and that's just sort of drafting, draft by draft by draft until you get the timing right.
The one thing that Maribeth does, she leaves all of her technology behind. I know. She gets that burner
Are
phone.
we jealous?
I know. And I think that's something for women, and maybe not the millennials, but so much, they have learned to incorporate technology.
They've come up with it. So when they have
we
to,
didn't
yes,
so much.
Yeah.
And I envied that. I don't want any of it. And just having to go to the library to use a computer.
Well, she mentions, there's a mention of how once when they went on this vacation to her friend Elizabeth's house, there was no connectivity, and so she just had to kind of choose to disconnect. And then that dread of when she comes back in, which is completely me. I'm very all or nothing with technology. So when we'll go on vacation, sometimes I will completely go off. And it is so wonderful. I get as addicted to being disconnected as I am being connected in my everyday life. But then there's that moment of total panic before you log on the first time, where you're just like, oh, there's going to be like, an IRS audit, a death, and like 25,000 unanswered emails. It's never that bad.
It's never that bad, right? When she moves to Pittsburgh and she moves into this apartment, but for the first time, I think she learns how to accept things from others.
Yeah.
And whether it's kindness or just, I thought that was so wonderful how that evolves for her. And
because initially she thinks she's just running away because she's exhausted, but then she accidentally goes to Pittsburgh, which you realize is perhaps not so accidental. It's not just the train was leaving there, but then what happens there, because she's coming in with no baggage, she's using a fake name, and she's feeling that she doesn't have to bring all those expectations that she has at home with her husband, her children, her mother, her best friend who's now her boss. And so she can just kind of operate however she wants. Then to her surprise, even without being the person who's always bending over backwards to help people, even being a little snarky sometimes, people still respond to her. They still like her. And I think that that's really to understand that you can be appreciated not in spite of your flaws, but for them too, that they're all kind of part of a package.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. So what a huge revelation for her.
Right.
I mean,
for all of us, right? Like stop
no
beating
kidding.
yourself up for every little thing that's wrong with you.
Oh, I just said the wrong thing, or I just
Right.
said everything.
Yeah.
Analyzing everything you think that you've done wrong,
Right.
instead of the other way around. So Dr. Stephen Grant, you mentioned him.
Yes.
And he has his own little secrets and interesting, but tell us about his DNA. Where did he come from? Because what a great character.
I don't know. I mean, I actually have these wonderful doctors in my life who all are wonderful, loving, caring people, but I kind of got to them by way of all the jerks. And Maribeth is sort of really sort of in the beginning of the book, she's kind of shunted along with it through the medical establishment, and she just feels completely powerless. And then when she gets to Pittsburgh, she's trying to find a cardiologist she can pay cash to, and there's some problems. She winds up with Dr. Grant. And I just thought there was just something very kind of old school physician about him. And he took his time with her, and he was sort of saw the whole person. And I don't know, I've had a crush on him. And people ask me, you know, what's the difference between YA and adult? And I joke that there's less sex in the adult book, and that the sexiest scene is a lice picking scene. And that it probably represents my fantasy now, which is pathetic.
Yeah. But you know, it is old school, because it's how many times does a doctor really get to know you as a person, or know any of your history?
No, right. And she's actually masking her history, but still, the fact somebody's kind of sitting, you know, after the exams, she goes into his office, and at first she's just like, "There's going to be bad news. Why else are you invited into a doctor's office?"
So Maribeth, when she's in Pittsburgh, she goes to the Berg birth parents, right?
I love that name. I've never heard anybody have to say that out loud. It's a mouthful.
When I read that, I go, okay, let me make sure I got this right. .com.
.org.
.org. Oh,
yep.
It has to be a .org.
I think so, yeah.
So Janice Pickering. So tell us a little bit about this and her search.
So she's there a few weeks, and she's feeling better, and she's just not going back. And it's sort of, she doesn't quite get why she's not going back. And meanwhile, she initiates a search for her birth mother. And Maribeth has known she was adopted since she was little, but as with so many things in her life, there's never just been time to dwell on that. Like, other people might make a big deal of that. For her, it's not a huge part of her identity until she has children of her own. And then there's, you know, when you're trying to conceive, there's all those questions about your background that are blank for her. And then her children themselves, her daughter in particular, she doesn't look like anybody in the family, and she's got this steely manner, and it's like, where did you come from? And she doesn't have that answer. But it's really after this out of the blue health crisis that she's kind of looking for answers. And at least in the beginning, she goes looking for her birth mother for health reasons. And that's where she meets up with Janice Pickering, who is, you know, she works as a school social worker, but her kind of like volunteer job or calling is she helps people reunite with their birth families.
And we don't want to say too much about.
And she teaches her to swim there.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
There's those pools in Pittsburgh, right? Yeah. So, you know, you're YA, and I asked that, you know, authors who write, you know, in another for age level, but then maybe you'll write an adult, or they go the other way. They write for adults, and now they're going to write for a middle grade or a young adult. Is it always the story that dictates who the audience is for you? You know, writing YA, you didn't set out to write a YA story.
No.
Yeah.
I'm always the audience. I'm always writing the story for myself. And I think there's some young adult authors who had miserable adolescence, and YA gives them an opportunity to kind of go back and rewrite the script. For me, that's not the case. My adolescence was fine. The miserable years were before. So even, you know, with If I Stay, with Just One Day, with I Was Here, it's what adult me is grappling with. It's just that it's always been these younger characters to kind of drive the bus. With Leave Me, because I wanted to write the story about marriage and motherhood, it had to be, you know, older characters telling the story. So back to your original question, there's always the idea of the story, but it's not until that character arrives that we're off to the races.
So, If I Stay,
yes.
You know, your blockbuster bestseller, you know, and made into a movie.
Yeah.
It was such a contrast to me. I kept thinking about that book with this, and I don't know, it was because in that story, you know, it's the whole question about, will I stay because I've had unimaginable tragedy in my life? I'm not sure it's worth staying. And for her, but now in Leave Me, Maribeth is sort of the opposite. You know, she has to leave in order to be saved. It's sort of. I thought it was just so interesting for me just to think of the two books. And
I didn't think of them like sort of as like how one was somebody. Yes, and then of course the title. There's Stay and there's Leave, which was again not intentional. The title was my brilliant editor's idea. I didn't even come up with that. So, but yeah, I think you know, I think we all return to the same terrain, just in different forms. But we all have our areas of kind of obsession. That are the things that keep us up at night that we wind up writing through and writing about.
Right. And I think, you know, the whole thing with a story is that, and not to give away any spoilers, but sometimes you have to leave, and you have to leave your life.
Right.
in order to get back
It's
to
not
where
so,
you belong.
It's
right?
not so different to where she
Yeah.
went, now that I think of it.
That's
You
good.
know, I
Right.
hadn't made that connection, but Mia, sorry, spoilers here if you haven't heard, but Mia leaves Adam. And she has to do that in order to kind of find her way back to herself and for them to find their way back to each other.
Right. Right. So you were a journalist for a long time, and
Yeah.
you wrote for a lot of different publications: 17, Nation, Cosmo, New York Times Magazine, Time Out New York, many others. And you've written on so many different topics as a journalist. You know, whether it's women in war, or it's young people and suicide, or the raw food movement.
Right. Oh, I love that piece. Yeah, it was fun.
But you've written on so many different topics and a lot of travel writing.
Mm-hmm.
So how has your life as a journalist? How has that informed your life as a novelist? And what has that helped you do? I mean, I can say what I think has helped.
Okay, what did you tell me first?
Oh, well, I know. I think it's the way you describe a scene. It's the way you put a character together. It's so many things that the facts of what you need to know about what's going on, you get them right. Are you those details are there.
Well, thank you.
Okay. So I want to know how has that part of your career informed your novel?
Well, you mentioned the travel writing, and
Yeah.
I think it all kind of goes back
Yeah.
to the traveling that I did
Right.
as before I even went to college. And travel early on kind of exposed me to the fact that the perspective changes everything, and that different cultures look at different things a certain way. And it throws you out of your comfort zone and forces you to kind of sort of see things from a different point of view and understand just how nuanced the world is, but also how there's some universalities there. People just want their children to be okay. People want to feel loved and validated. People want to feel like they're part of part of something bigger than they are. But I think that, and then being a journalist, the same thing. You have to kind of force yourself kind of out of your perspective, and it gives you a great sense of empathy, which I think as a novelist is huge, to be able to kind of understand where all these different people are coming from, which is another reason I think there's only one villain in any of the books that I've written. So I think there's the alt BS, Bradford Smith, and I Was Here is the only villain I've ever written, because even these flawed people, I think you understand sort of what's there and what's causing their insecurity or causing them to act out or run away from their children.
Yeah. So, If I Stay, the movie, were you happy with it?
I was really happy with it. I thought that, it's definitely different from the book, but I thought that the emotional experience translated. I thought the characters felt like the characters I had written, and I thought the music was fantastic, and that's something that on the page you just can't do. And to have a director like R.J. Cutler, who was as comfortable doing the rock scenes as he was the classical scenes, was wonderful.
Yeah. So, option for Leave Me?
We have only just gone out with it, and we will see. Everybody who I talk to says to me, I can picture the movie, and I can hear the voiceover at the beginning of the movie. So, and they're already casting it. Yeah. So, I will say that Hollywood's favorite subject is not a middle-aged woman, which I think there's a great hunger for these kinds of films.
Is.
So, and they're always surprised when they release something that appeals to, the people who don't want the CGI spectacles and it makes money.
Right.
Like with If I Stay, the $11 million movie that made $80 million. Everyone was like, oh my gosh, but people want human stories.
They do.
Yeah.
And I think this whole year has been a disappointment if you want some more stories with meat, because if you love superheroes and you like animated films, then you had a great year for movies this year.
I know, although we're getting into the prestige film season. I'm really
right.
looking forward to Billy Lynn's Long Halftime War, because I
me
just
too.
read it and I loved it so
love that
much. And
book.
Ang Lee, I have total faith.
Yeah. Okay. So what are you working on now?
I am working on a young adult novel. And then I have an idea for an adult novel, and then there's also some non-book related scripty type things.
Oh, scripty type. Okay.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Gayle, thank you so much, and congratulations.
Thank you, Becky. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah,
I don't think I've ever actually been in the physical store before. I know.
It's long overdue.
It is, and it's just such a cute little area. I had no idea.
Yeah. So please come back with the next book and see us again.
I would love to.
Great conversation with author Gayle Forman and her first novel for adults. You might know her from the best-selling novel for young adults called If I Stay. Her new one is called Leave Me. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.